Howdy, Dennis Bradford here. Let's think some about being, feeling, and doing better. How does the egoic self rise and fall? We don't really need to understand the answers to such questions in order to live better emotionally. On the other hand, we do need to reduce attachment to the for me that is the essence of every emotion in order to live better emotionally. The reason it's helpful to understand the egoic self is in order to persist when difficulties arise when practicing to reduce attachment to it. In fact, this is one of the common important obstacles to starting any kind of spiritual practice. Quote, trying to overcome the ego without really understanding it brings up guilt, self-condemnation, and other negative feelings, which is one of the main reasons why people are reluctant to become involved in spiritual work, end quote. From I by David R. Hawkins, M.D., Ph.D. Although mastering some kind of spiritual practice is almost always required for living well, at least getting good at one is required for flourishing emotionally. In other words, we don't need to become sages to live well emotionally. However, the practices that result in sagehood are the same as the ones that enable us to flourish emotionally. Similarly, we don't need to become sages to love unconditionally. However, the practices that result in sagehood are the same as the ones that enable us to love unconditionally. So, even if we don't become sages, and even if we don't have the intention of becoming sages, understanding the egoic self is still valuable. Animal brains evolved for survival. Perception evolved as animal brains evolved. Animals, of course, need to find food to eat and to avoid being eaten themselves if they are to survive. Animals that cannot perceive quickly die. Animals enjoy perceptual awareness. Quote, perception, like awareness, is an impersonal quality of consciousness, end quote. Consciousness itself doesn't have any programs. It's impersonal. Always, one must pay the price. Duality is the price that animals pay for being able to perceive. The duality is between the aware subject and the perceptual object, which may be the food or the threat. Evolution added on to the forebrain of the animal brain to get the human brain. Our intellects are able to think abstractly and manufacture images and sequences of images related to animal emotions, for example fear, and desires, for example lust or hunger. Of course, having intellects is a critical survival tool for us. However, suffering from duality and animal emotions and desires is the price that we humans pay for having intellects. These qualities lead to frequent, often almost continual, dissatisfactions. Dissolving them requires spiritual progress, which is fostered by spiritual practices. The paradigmatic spiritual practice is meditation, which everyone is able to do. The intellect, supplemented with meditation, quote, is able to recontextualize the contents of the ego, end quote. It shifts the emphasis from perpetually dwelling on the ever-changing contents of awareness to its contexts. The ego cannot avoid positionality. Positions, again, are like fundamental axioms of thought. There's no positionality without duality. Duality infects the entire conceptual hierarchy. The result is that the ego lives behind a screen of thoughts, beliefs, emotions, and attitudes. It doesn't dwell in reality. It cannot get past its own interpretations to experience reality, which keeps it dissatisfied. Anyone can confirm this through meditation. I myself am not a person. My supposed self is only content, which is not really me. Who am I? I'm not the content of awareness, but the audience, the impersonal witnessing consciousness itself. It's the same for you. We are the context. Self, with a capital S rather than self. To the self, studying forms is a fascinating pastime. Our intellects, though, are powerful two-edged swords. They can investigate and wipe out smallpox, as well as invent hydrogen bombs. Like other mammals, we humans are often curious. It doesn't take a lot of study before the so-called existential questions arise. Who am I? What am I? Where did I come from? How did I get here? What will happen to me? What may I hope for? Satisfactory answers are impossible without transcending the ego. Doing that comes from realizing that the ego is only an it. It's not me. It's not a person. It's not personal. When we identify with it, we make it personal, which obstructs transcending it. Transcending the ego requires us to stop identifying and personalizing it. The ego has different structures or programs at different levels of consciousness. More about this in subsequent videos. By itself, it's powerless. We can surpass any level by declining its programs and elevating above it. And we can do that better and better as we progress spiritually. The ego has no power to stop us from doing that. Quote, in reality, nothing thoughts say about oneself or others has any reality. All statements are fallacious and represent programming and positionality, end quote. Is dropping false thoughts harmful? Of course not. It's quite the opposite. It's required to realize the self, which lacks describable qualities that can be thought. Quote, the ego feeds off of and is seduced by the energy of the negativity of pain, suffering, hate, and guilt to which it gets attached, addicted, end quote. From Power versus Force. The dualistic ego is competitive and also fearful, end quote. From Truth versus Falsehood. If so, whenever you notice negative energy from dissatisfaction, pain, unwanted emotions, and competitiveness, realize that you are feeding the ego. My suggestion? Meditate. On the other hand, whenever you notice positive energy from satisfaction, pleasure, wanted emotions, and non-competitiveness, realize that you are starving the ego. Where does positive energy come from? Primarily from the satisfaction of our biological needs, not wants, and spiritual practices like meditation. Let's end emotional distress